The ugly truth is, every year, less and less people are reading books. Literacy rates among students have plummeted for decades, and no one has done a damn thing about it. And this shouldn't surprise anybody. The proliferation of smartphones and highly stimulating media has led to generations of children glued to screens rather than pages, and I fear that we're only catching the first waves of a tsunami of illiteracy approaching. Back in October, there was an article from The Atlantic titled "The Elite College Students Who Can't Read," which featured a professor from Columbia explaining that his recent cohorts of students simply cannot read. They struggle to focus on sonnets or finish a book cover to cover. And this isn't just at the college level, but at public schools too. And you can't blame the students because, like myself, I was brought up under a public education system that taught me to memorize, regurgitate, and sit through these monotonous lessons on excerpts from books that took all the joy out of reading. We were raised to be these worker bees, to pound out spreadsheets and never once engage with the humanities. We're taught to prioritize productivity over empathy and self-discovery. But this doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. One of the primary reasons that people no longer choose to read or even can't read is their inability to focus. And your natural reaction might be to point the finger at social media, and it's an easy culprit. Over the past 2 decades, we've inundated ourselves with a stream of stimulation in the palm of our hands, and that's only been amplified in recent years. But that's just the early stage of a pernicious shift away from art towards entertainment. It penetrates far deeper than that. Ted Jolla explored these shifting trends of media on his Substack, in which he argued that we've moved beyond the replacement of art, such as books, paintings, and movies, for entertainment and are in the midst of a culture dominated by distraction. Instead of sitting down to think, read, and learn, we swipe through a deluge of highly stimulating, fast-paced videos, each grabbing our attention for 3 to 10 seconds before we immediately consume the next. This behavior of doom scrolling makes it obvious why no one's reading anymore. Why would you sit down and focus on a long, laborious book when you can just swipe through endless hours of dopamine spiking content? Author David Foster Wallace tried to sound this alarm back in a 2003 interview in which he explained that even amongst his highly educated friends, fewer and fewer people were reading.
Reading requires sitting alone by yourself in a quiet room, and I have friends, intelligent friends, who don't like to read because it's not just bored. There's an almost dread that comes up, I think, here about having to be alone and having to be quiet, and you see that when you walk in. When you walk into most public spaces in America, it isn't quiet anymore. They pipe music through. And the music's easy to make fun of because it's usually really horrible music, but it seems significant that we don't want things to be quiet ever anymore.
And I think he highlights a key point there. The absence of solitude in our lives and the uncomfortability and dread that comes along with solitude. No matter where we go, we're constantly pumping ourselves with background noise, screens, and vapid mental stimulation. In contrast, reading requires quiet, solitude, and concentration, all of which are lacking in an anxiety-ridden society that further diminishes its already diminutive attention span with short-form, addictive content. If you look at this graph from Ted Jolla's article, you'll see nearly every form of media has slowly transitioned to a shorter and shorter format. And not only shorter in length, but they follow the shortest path to a dopamine-inducing experience. Examples include clickbait headlines, short audios on TikTok, and dating apps. We even see this with services like Blinkist that attempt to summarize and dumb down books to bite-sized pieces. But that part of our brain that hungers for concentration and extended focus never gets fed.
It's true that here in the US, every year the culture gets more and more hostile. And I don't mean hostile like angry, it becomes more and more difficult to ask people to read or to look at a piece of art for an hour or to listen to a piece of music that's complicated and that takes work to understand because, well, there are a lot of reasons, but particularly now in computer and internet culture, everything is so fast. And the faster things go, the more we feed that part of ourselves, but don't feed the part of ourselves that likes quiet.
Another driving force behind the decline in literary interest and literacy is our ever-growing expectation to be gratified at every moment of the day. We see this with food choices, streaming options, and even with books. People demand to be entertained from start to finish. Reading is seen as boring or useless by a population taught to pursue productivity and pleasure. They have no time for the rigor and complexities of a novel. And any reader understands how foolish and misguided this perspective is because they know firsthand how rewarding and gratifying a book can be. and literary critic Harold Bloom expresses this perfectly.
I think that unless you read deeply and in your own interest, unless you explore what is most profound in what has come before you, then you never will get down to the recesses of your own self. You'll never learn what Ralph Waldo Emerson rightly called self-trust and self-reliance. And most deeply, perhaps, you never will heal the self. I think that in a culture which has all of the peculiar difficulties and complexities of the one currently developing around us, there is nothing more profoundly healing than the act of solitary reading, provided that what is being read is indeed permanent, deep, lasting work. Work that calls for all of your faculties in response. Work that calls you out of your own deep, as it were. Work that transforms you.
That right there is the difference between immediate pleasure and delayed gratification. And it would be wrong to say that book talk or Gen Z's repulsion towards classics and literary fiction is indicative of the majority, but it does show us where things are trending, at least within younger generations. Long books, books with complex vocabulary, books that challenge or confuse you do not offer the persistent stream of entertainment demanded by the average consumer. Hence services like Blinkist and Shortform. In many ways, we become a society that refuses to take its medicine, a society that avoids the discomfort of a difficult book, and as a result, they never learn the rewards that lie on the other side. Many readers today lunge at shallow, mass-market paperbacks filled with pap and predictable plot lines, whereas literary fiction is viewed as an activity for the pompous and academic. On the one hand, it's the fault of public schools that turns reading into this mind-numbing assignment, whereas on the other hand, it's the reluctance of adults to continue reading beyond the classroom and to challenge their current reading level. Now, that's not to say that these other types of books don't offer any value or that every book you read should come with a scholarly approach, but it's just the equivalent of a diet purely composed of packaged foods. It pays dividends to learn how to cook, prepare a meal, and digest nutrient-dense food. Simply put, you can't live off a diet of kid cuisine deep into your adulthood. Combining a dread of difficult, potentially boring books with an addiction towards short-form, highly stimulating content, and you can see why less and less people are reading. So where do we go from here? How do we inspire younger generations to fall in love with reading and save current ones from the addiction to digital opium? Well, I want to say it begins with reintroducing solitude and deep concentration into our lives. But the answer is likely meeting them where they're at, social media. And although Book Talk and BookTube has its fair share of negative trends, by and large the community is incredibly positive and shows how enriching reading can be. And various creators show the benefits of deep reading and that boredom isn't always indicative of a book's value. They show the role that literature plays in our lives beyond pleasure. Fiction allows us to enter the perspective of others, empathize with characters, and broaden our awareness. Stories can transform and heal us, they can make us feel heard and not alone, and they allow us to explore ourselves and our place in the world. So when you look at it that way, whether a book is boring or entertaining becomes secondary to how it enables you to grow as a person. Now, all in all, I think we're swimming against the current. It's quite an uphill battle, but I think the future is promising. There's various creators in the space that are showing how enriching and fulfilling reading can be for someone and their life, and it's inspiring more and more people to pick up a book, to get into literature, and have a greater sense of comfortability and community within it. So all in all, I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about the social media addiction, this decline in our attention span, our inability to focus, and where reading stands, literature stands within culture and within society. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts, and I hope that I can do my part with this in 2025. So like the video if you enjoyed it, share it with a friend if you found it worthwhile, subscribe for more content like this, and I will see you all in the next one.